You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious. I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for May 23rd, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. Brendan, our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to figure out what the hell was going on in this film.
That's a trap. That's a trap.
Very much could be. With Ving Rhames. We're trapped with Ving Rhames.
Yeah, we got to defuse a bomb with this one.
Because, good Lord. Or should I say entity, which is the God, of course, in this film. I have
God
no
Almighty,
idea.
here to ruin movies
what
forever.
To make of it. I'm so excited to have this conversation. For what it is Mission Impossible, I'm always down for a Mission Impossible, but also I have tried to get this gentleman on the show for a while now. And he's a very busy man, so a couple of times it has fallen through. But we have trapped him in the cage with us. He cannot leave. He's here.
I'm not leaving. I'm here.
Yes. The great Griffin Schiller is finally on the show. Griffin, thanks for being here, my friend.
You. Yes, no. It's great because JD, you and I are in a fantasy hockey league together.
Yeah.
We've gotten to know each other through that a bit, and then also, obviously through social media and whatnot. And it's just, I know. I'm glad that we're finally here to do this, and it's for something like Mission Impossible. I wish, I wish I had more positive things to say about the film. But as you assured me before we started recording, we're all in step here. So
you're not going to be alone. You're not in your own
I
corner
feel
there.
comfortable.
This will not be a fight.
in a
We'll
corner,
simply
but-
say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
That's what I like to hear.
You're with friends here.
Good. No, but I'm happy to be on. I'm happy we can make this happen.
Yes.
It's been a long time in the works, and I'm stoked to be be here, man.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. I've loved your videos. I feel like I've watched you
man.
for what feels like years now.
Oh, geez. That's really kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to have you.
Film Speaks one of
here
my
on the show.
favorites. It absolutely is.
Oh, it's great.
Oh, you guys are
It's
too kind.
fantastic.
What the hell? This is
We didn't really
You're
want
my
to
friends
talk
here,
about
man.
this movie. We just wanted to sing your praises.
Well, you're too kind. I love what you guys do over at In Session, and I mean, I got looped in through you guys through Ryan, obviously. Mutual friend Ryan McQuarrie. I think you guys. You guys kill it, man. Like your podcasts are a lot of fun. I think you guys have great writers over there. Like it's what's not to love about In Session
I appreciate
film?
it. Yeah, it's
Thanks, man. Appreciate
grown
it.
beyond anything
course.
I could have ever imagined. We started this in 2013, 12 years later, still here kicking it.
Yeah.
Even if it's just Brendan and I talking to ourselves half the time. I don't know.
I mean, hey, honestly, I've kind of come to the realization that when as great as it is to have a team of people and we've all, I think, worked for outlets or whatnot where that is you are part of a larger team and whatnot. There is something really special about when you whittle it down to a couple of people who really care, and then you're just creatively flowing with those your friends or your collaborators, and you're just when you're all in line and you're creating something that you're both stoked on,
And honestly,
for
some
sure.
of our best content, I feel like, are ones that we just do for ourselves. And
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
that
yeah,
makes
yeah,
for the
yeah.
best content.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. And yeah, we're hoping that the chemistry with you as well, Griffin, just seeps into this conversation.
Good,
I'm sure it
good,
will.
Good.
I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
it
will. No. I have no concerns at all.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. We are, of course, talking about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Before we do, though, I want to give you the floor, Griffin, in case any of our listeners are being introduced to you for the first time.
Yeah, for sure.
What are your thoughts on Mission Impossible, in particular, Dead Reckoning, which obviously is a part one to this with Final Reckoning? What are your thoughts on the franchise? What did you think about Dead Reckoning? What were you feeling coming into this film?
Yeah, so I've always liked Mission Impossible. I've never loved Mission Impossible, but I do kind of appreciate how it sort of just look at my background, right? I'm a massive James Bond fan, and I love espionage and I love spy fiction and stuff like that. So I'm always going to be rooting for films in that subgenre. So
Sure.
I think what I loved about the latter mission films specifically is that whenever, we were kind of in a gap between Bond films, Mission would always be there to kind of fill in the gap. And because the Daniel Craig Bond films were pushing that franchise in a bit more of an artistic, character-driven direction, one that I really dug. I think what I liked about the Mission films is it kind of harkened back to the old James Bond movies, right? Like some of the more action-packed adventures of the latter Sean Connery films and the good Roger Moore ones. And they were just, they obviously began to pride themselves on their stunt work and practical effects and pushing the boundaries in terms of that, but they just, I don't know, they also had like a nice team dynamic that separated them from Bond. And while I don't think any of the characters are anywhere near as complex as other spy protagonists or whatnot, I think when they're all kind of jamming together in a situation, when they're all trying to complete this impossible mission, it's a lot of fun to watch. And I think what these films do really well is they give you the base level genre thrills that you want out of a film like this. And so I mean, full disclosure, like I respect Tom Cruise as an actor. I don't like him as a person. I think there's a lot of baggage with him that
that's fair.
I feel like he's done a really good job rehabilitating his image. Post jumping on Oprah's couch and whatnot and stuff like that. Just the post Katie Holmes stuff.
And everyone was talking about him at that time, and this was predating like social media and internet. Like that means everything surrounding him was pretty high profile at that point.
Big time.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I mean, and it's through him that I think most people really were exposed to Scientology, and then people started looking more into Scientology and like what it actually is, and the horrible things they've done to people, and the claws when they get their claws in you, it's just sort of impossible to get out. I mean, like it truly is a cult, and he's like a pretty high-ranking member of Scientology. And so and specifically with these latter Mission films, it's kind of hard to separate that part of him from the movies that we're getting, because I do think so much of what Scientology is kind of baked into the DNA of specifically Dead Reckoning and The Final Reckoning. It's one of those things where it's like Ethan Hunt wasn't really a character. I mean, like in that first film, he's a character, but like as it progresses, it kind of just became a Tom Cruise vehicle. And really with these last couple of films, it's like it's like the line between Ethan Hunt and Tom Cruise is basically non-existent. So you have no, at least from my perspective, it's hard for me to separate the actor from all that stuff that surrounds him. So look,
sure, that's fair.
Is he like a fantastic, versatile actor? Has he done a lot of good for the film industry? Yes. So have a lot of bad people in the industry, and I think it's one of those instances just where you can try and separate those elements where you can, but it also does inform some of the art that I think that they make. That being said, Mission Impossible, I can enjoy it as a straightforward spy action flick, and I have liked all of them to varying degrees before Dead Reckoning. And with Dead Reckoning, I just really, I don't know. It was one of those things where it's like I thought the AI angle was interesting, but it was something that they already tried to attempt with a film like Rogue Nation, for instance, like the anti Ethan Hunt or the anti IMF. We saw that with Solomon Lane and the Syndicate and whatnot. And I think what they try to do with the Entity theoretically could be interesting, right? You have the anti Ethan Hunt, but this time it's like it's a system, right? And it's something created by humanity. And so what happens when you create this thing that becomes like Ethan? I mean, you would think that it would force Ethan to confront some of the things about him as a person, and then perhaps some of the flaws that he has. But because this character has no flaws, it's like, well, okay, there's really none of that comparison going on there. So
he is a messiah after all,
right? Well, especially in this film. And so. I mean, like the AI stuff, I thought, it was an interesting potential. I didn't think it really went anywhere, and then it kind of like amounted to just like, okay, it's just Skynet, right? Like that's more or less what the Entity is, with its plot and everything like that. I wasn't impressed with the action as much in the last film. I thought the the cliff jump was really good, but we saw it in all the trailers, so its effect kind of wore off when that time came. The train sequence, I hate to say it, I think was done better in the first Mission Impossible. That set piece,
I agree.
It's just kind of bogged down by a lot of really questionable CG, and I get this was like a COVID production, but it's when you're priding yourself on like doing it for real and like these intense stunts and whatnot.
It stands out. It's jarring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So like, that was in there. I mean, the biggest abomination of the film was how they handled Ilsa, not only killing off the best character in these films, but having her, I don't know, like die for essentially no reason. I thought that was a really that was a really questionable decision, and then how it leads into this indoctrination of grace, and when they're talking about like the IMF almost in like cult-like terms. I mean, that was really where I started to get off-put by what exactly the IMF was, because it went from being this branch or this agency of the U.S. government to now being this like moral rehabilitation organization, which is very, very weird. On top of that, it was just kind of, it was like way too self-serious. It was way too just I don't know, like the importance of everything. It just it lost the fun aspect of these movies, and I get Mission Impossible Fallout was a very serious film, but it was also a POV movie, and it also delivered on those thrills, and it was also exciting. And it is dealing with like, the consequences of Ethan's actions and protecting people, but it's not this, I don't know, drab, like really intense, like end of the world kind of. I mean, yes, there's a nuke that's going to go off, but it's not like as apocalyptic as like these last two films kind of feel like. So, the handling of the female characters, the AI kind of not really working for me in how it was used in the film. And the set pieces not really being all that impressive. I mean, Gabriel is kind of a nothing antagonist. Some of the cutting, especially towards the beginning, I think when they're setting the stage, feels like really jarring. Like they had multiple ideas for sets up, and they're setting.
It's really playing with the 180-degree rule in very 100%. Weird ways.
Well, that's sort of the other thing, right? Like it's trying to do what De Palma did in terms of like voyeurism and like trying to throw you off the scent and the cloak and dagger thing in that, what he did in that first Mission Impossible film, but it's like it's superficially aping what he's doing without understanding how those mechanics work in the story that De Palma is telling. And so it just feels like a really like gimmicky send up.
It feels homage-y, which doesn't have to be a bad thing. I mean, in many ways, all of these movies within this franchise are sort of indirectly about movie making in some way. And especially the McQuarrie films, whether it be like the Hitchcockian vibes of Rogue Nation, or maybe the more modern warfare vibes of something like Fallout. And then Dead Reckoning especially felt like it was trying to be like a 90s, late 80s type of thriller in some ways, which is where those Brian De Palma homages certainly come into play, but they don't really feel as complementary to whatever conversation is being had, whatever thematic intent is being provoked. It's a superficial thing.
Yeah. And to your point about it feeling very like 80s and 90s in terms of what it's trying to do, I think that also... like, yes, I mean, the film is kind of, on a macro level, is about analog versus automation. But again, going back to how it handles AI, I don't think it necessarily understands the dilemma we currently face. I think it is very much rooted in an outdated, specifically Dead Reckoning, is rooted in an outdated sense of technology, which is why I evoke Skynet when I'm making the comparison between the entity and that.
Right. That's why I was always confused by the critical reaction to it in Dead Reckoning, because it felt so vacuous to me. Yeah, it was so thinly veiled, and to your point, outdated. I don't see what others did.
I think if anything,
AI in that film.
I think it was more of a response to just the simple metaphor that AI in that movie was meant to reflect Tom Cruise's own fears of AI's infiltration within the movies. If I don't necessarily disagree with that fear, but at the same time, there is something maybe overly superficial about something that should have a little bit more complexity baked into it. And I think that's
if that's going to be the premise, maybe spend some time on the emotional response then. But Dead Reckoning doesn't do that.
Or spend even more time 100%. On just the idea of going full analog, which that movie flirts with. And so does Final Reckoning. It flirts with that. We get VHS tapes in this one. We get the biplane at the end, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Everything feels a bit more older and tangible, but it feels like it's only flirting with that idea.
For sure. I'm in full agreement because I think specifically in Dead Reckoning, well, actually, take the mission films out of it. The film that does this whole like analog and automation thing well and is very concise in what it's trying to say about our relationship with technology and the need for the human element in these larger systems is Top Gun Maverick. And that's because it is like is the film where it's very clear that this is what Tom Cruise is getting at, and it's because he's an aging pilot in a profession that is phasing pilots out, and he goes on this, he does the impossible, seemingly impossible, and he trains people in that film to prove that it's like, you think you may have this all figured out, but if you're sitting in that cockpit, sometimes you need your hand on the controls in order to determine whether or not you need to pull the trigger, not pull the trigger, do a maneuver here. Like there is a human element integral to that. And I think that is conveyed so much better when you're, I guess in the context of a Top Gun movie, because you have a vehicle that is literally driven by a person, and you have a very clear counterpoint where it's a vehicle very clearly driven by AI or drones or something like that. It's like, can that drone make the same judgment call? And that's stuff that's also in the headlines, right? Where you have people where like obviously drone warfare has been a big thing, ever since since Iraq and whatnot. And so I think like that's an interesting discussion to have about the need for a human element. Like does I could go on about that, but I think in these movies, I almost I get that idea is present in those films, but part of me also wonders like how much Top Gun Maverick colored in what people like how people were viewing these films, because if you just look at it at face value, it just kind of looks like Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie are a bunch of like Luddites, and they're like so afraid of like technology and everything the scene in Dead Reckoning that I think of is when like Luther and Benji just start smashing their computers like a bunch of maniacs when they think like the entity is onto them, and it's like well, what it's not gonna do, like what is that gonna do? Like if this thing is in the network or whatever, like smashing your computer it was just, I don't know, it was like one of those weird beats that I always go back to. I'm just like, that's how you view technology. And like I get that there are reasons to be concerned specifically with AI. But I also think like you have to be foolish not to understand like technology can be a good thing. Like you don't like there are advancements made that are there to help us. And yeah, I mean, kind of going back to the 80s, 90s thing that you mentioned earlier, that's another reason why I think this film just has a very outdated view of automation and technology. Yeah.
And that's really interesting because technology is baked into the DNA of this whole series.
That's so true. Yeah. It's so true.
That's how they do all of their objectives.
Technology.
And they don't wrestle with that at all. All right. Well, with all of that said, a lot of context leading into the Final Reckoning. And I guess to reiterate, while it sounds like Brendan and I might be a little higher on the franchise as a whole than you, we both do not like Dead Reckoning all that much. I had a lot of questions. I was open to the Final Reckoning, hoping that it would recontextualize things for me. We'll talk about how the film may or may not succeed in that.
I will say I have seen Dead Reckoning 3 times for a movie that I admittedly say I don't really care for all that much. The second time I saw it, I liked it even less than the first time. The third time I started to come around on a few things. I think the first maybe 45 minutes are quite good. I actually think there's a solid setup for something that it ends up squandering later on, as we sort of alluded to already. But
in the Sevastopol sequence is like a top tier mission. Like that's incredible. Like as an isolated sequence, I'm with you there.
Yeah. There's a setup there that had the potential for something great, and I don't necessarily mind the style that it's going for, Dead Reckoning in particular. But yeah, as we talked about just already for a few moments there, it doesn't commit to its ideas at all.
Yeah, I agree. Among many, many other issues I have with the film, but we won't go into that here. It is to say it's one of my least favorite Mission Impossible movies. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into The Final Reckoning. It is, of course, directed by Christopher McQuarrie. It stars Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt, as always, Haley Atwell, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, Jose Morales, Angela Bassett, Shane Wingham, and a slew of others that come and go throughout the film.
A lot of TV actors.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of you are very familiar with Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, but just in case, the synopsis reads, our lives are the sum of our choices. That is it. That is all that this says, which clues us in that it was probably written by AI. At least that's what I'm choosing to believe. All right, let's go ahead and get into this. Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. We'll start with you, Griffin. What did you think about The Final Reckoning?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't really think that anything would cause me to reflect how I felt about Dead Reckoning, but in hindsight's 2020, and here I am thinking about, wow, maybe I was a little too harsh on Dead Reckoning. Like, I still stand by every single thing that I said about that film and the decisions that were made, but as opposed to this film, which I quite honestly will probably never watch again, at least I can watch Dead Reckoning and like enjoy aspects of it, enjoy Ethan and Grace's relationship, which is non-existent in this film, by the way. I know this is going to sound harsh. I compared it to The Rise of Skywalker in terms of how it just kind of abandons all the ideas that were established in the previous film. And then also in that first, I don't know, everyone's saying like hour, like 30 minutes to an hour. I really don't know how long it was. Like maybe it was an hour and a half. It felt like an eternity. But at least I'll just say in that first hour, the pacing felt so frenetic and stream of consciousness and like just like there weren't any scenes. Like things would just start and stop, and there were like these uncanny homages to things that vaguely resembled stuff that we would see that we saw in past Mission Impossible films. This was all happening to an effect where like I genuinely thought Ethan was in the entity for like a solid chunk of the opening of this movie because it felt so intentionally off kilter. And then he finally gets to the entity part and goes inside of it and everything, and I'm like, oh no, this is just bad. Like this is just like a fucking mess. And I think the other thing that's frustrating is like I struggled with some of the character writing in Dead Reckoning. Everyone just kind of felt like a mouthpiece for Christopher McQuarrie. But at least there were instances where, Ving Rhames, Tom Cruise, Simon Pegg, Rebecca Ferguson, they resembled their characters, even if it wasn't to the effect that it was in films prior. At least like it was like, okay, this is Ethan Hunt, this is Luther, and whatever. In this movie, the characters like this isn't Ethan Hunt, that's not Benji, that's not Luther. Like Grace, who is an explosive new addition in the last film, is not the character we know her to be, outside of just like her sleight of hand from the last film. And then what's extra weird about the Grace dynamic is they just kind of replaced Rebecca Ferguson with Haley Atwell, and I really was hoping they weren't going to do that. I was hoping that there was going to be something more to why they decided to get rid of Rebecca Ferguson, bring in Haley Atwell. Like, what new dynamic was she going to have with Ethan Hunt? and it's nothing. It's just the standard.
So unfortunate.
It is, right?
Sorry to cut you off, because
you're fine.
One of the weirdest things that Dead Reckoning did was the treatment of female characters in that one, especially when these female characters
100%.
had such great agency in the previous movies.
Yeah.
And this whole franchise was about how Ethan Hunt was putting everyone else's life above his own. But in Dead Reckoning, it kind of came off that he was really more of a protector of women specifically, and that
100%,
was it.
dude. Yeah.
And in a way, like, I feel like maybe part of Dead Reckoning is kind of going for that. There's a scene where Gabriel actually calls Ethan out for being someone that puts women specifically in bad situations. So it does seem to be a little bit aware of that, even if it doesn't maybe commit to that idea any further. But where it goes with Grace in this movie is just flabbergasting, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because I was listening to a podcast interview that McQuarrie did. I'll have to find it because it was like a 40-minute interview. I was like shocked that he did one that long. And he was talking about the fact that they had the end scenes written between Ethan and Grace. And so they kind of knew where that was going. But they didn't shoot her intro or her scenes, like the introduction to her characters or a lot of the earlier scenes until like 2 months ago, and it shows. It like really shows that was an afterthought, because that scene where he's at the party, which is like, first of all, how did he get to that party? I mean, sure, whatever. And then she just kind of like shows up. They have like this weird just run in, which was also kind of, it was like resembling like a run in he had with Ilsa and stuff. It was so weird the way that it would like do these homages to the past films, and I don't know. It like I get it. This is like a culmination movie, but these weren't like scenes. They were just like they were sketches of ideas that were just kind of slotted where I guess they felt they needed to be. And so I mean that opening with Grace is just, she comes out of nowhere, and then like she becomes a love interest, and it's like what. Well, that's just like extra weird, because like you recruited her. You like you were like, listen, this is gonna be your life now. You can give yourself to this purpose. And then, like a typical cult leader, he like I mean, I guess he doesn't seduce her, but it's just like they have like I don't know.
There's an exchange about their good looks, I feel like, even if it's not directly said, it feels like that's more implied. And that's unfortunate, because the way this whole franchise kind of flirted with the idea of what romance in action films is, I thought was kind of interesting.
Oh, sure.
Even when Ilsa Faust came in, like there was a little bit of a line being kind of drawn between them as to, oh, will they, won't they? What does this even really mean? And I found that kind of interesting. And then Dead Reckoning kind of makes it more obvious and literal, and almost seems to like not even just abandon, but it goes against its own ethos in some ways.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because I think what I liked about, and I just watched Rogue Nation, which is such a sensual film without even necessarily like without the characters saying much. Like there's just a mystique to Ilsa Faust as a character and a physicality to her that complements Ethan Hunt, because I mean, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but like for me, Tom Cruise is really hard to buy as a romantic lead. Like there's always just something that feels a bit stiff about it. Maybe it's because
I think it depends on the material. If it's more prickly material, I think it works.
Right. Like Eyes Wide Shut, right? Like
that's a great example.
That works because it's playing into everything that I think Tom Cruise is kind of good at. But like in like a straight romance fashion, I don't necessarily buy him as much. But in that film, I got the connection because they were both acting like so much of that, I guess, romance, if you will, or relationship was understated. It was all physical, and it was all done through exchanges and I don't know, just framing and movements and action, and it's like that was everything that Cruise and McQuarrie purport to want to get out of these films, right? They want like that's their whole thing is like the less dialogue the better, and they did it right out the gate. So when you cut to something like The Final Reckoning, and like there's so much like redundant dialogue, so much explaining, so much like writing around what is a very simple and straightforward story to the point where it just gets convoluted. I don't know, you really have to wonder if they just overthought it at a certain point, not just in terms of the relationship, because I know that's where we were starting at, but in terms of like everything, the scope, the scale, the threat. I mean, like I talk about the Rise of Skywalker, just specifically because it like abandons those initial ideas that they set up in Dead Reckoning, and Yeah, I don't know. Like, it felt like they got super self-conscious and insecure about the response, or I guess the performance of that initial film, that they just kind of, I mean, I don't know. These movies are kind of shot on the fly, so I don't know how much of a script was there, but it felt like whatever script was there went through like an insane amount of rewrites. Yeah, because I mean, I don't know if you guys like can say, but like what is this movie about? Right? Like I just had to take a step back after I saw it, and I was like, what are they trying to say? What do you want me to get out of this film? And I, honest to God, could not tell you.
I don't want to say a thought or even a theory, but I have a potential defense for this movie that I'm not even sure if it's one I buy into at all. It's, I was texting JD about this offline, so he's aware about what I'm going to get into. But
Okay.
Yeah, this is the first Mission Impossible film I've seen where I'm at a loss for words. I really am kind of at a loss for words with this one, and it's because of the movie itself, really. I think this is either one of the biggest blockbuster blunders of the past few decades, or one of the greatest acts of cinematic trolling that I've ever seen. And honestly, depending on which way I end up leaning, that might dictate how I end up feeling about the movie. Griffin, you were talking about The Rise of Skywalker, and I know that's been a comparison that a lot of other people have been making about The Final Reckoning and how it abandons a lot of those ideas. And there are a lot of obvious comparisons to make because the way the movie flows feels rather similar in some ways too.
Yeah.
But with regard to The Final Reckoning, I mean, the storytelling here reaches a level of incompetence that I thought was physically impossible. No pun.
Well, specifically for these two, right? Because they've shown us time and time again that they are capable of something better, that they understand story and structure. I mean, like Christopher McQuarrie goes on like countless podcasts talking about all of these things, about screenwriting. Like he's like, I have issues. Like, I don't know, some of his isms aren't for me necessarily, but like he's a damn good writer. He's an Academy Award winning writer, right? Like,
he's a fixer for a lot of films too.
Exactly. So it's like stuff that is so fundamental to screenwriting. How are you fucking up this bad in the last movie?
Well, and that's what made Rogue Nation and even Fallout work so well. And they're almost like this kind of complementary piece in some ways. There's a lot of parallels between the two of them because a lot of it is based on gestures and visual storytelling, like you were talking about there, Griffin. Rogue Nation's actually my favorite Mission Impossible film.
Great film.
I think it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. With regard to The Final Reckoning, going back to this one, and a lot of what I'm going to say here is more in line with the first act, maybe even first hour or so, but it doesn't even seem real. It doesn't even seem real.
I know.
It fumbles so hard that I honestly can't believe a talent like Christopher McQuarrie could drop the ball like this, unless he did it on purpose. and I think a lot of my thoughts for the remainder of this conversation, at least some of my thoughts, will maybe involve me educating that what if scenario, because it's so egregious that it almost feels like it was done deliberately, like it was intended to deliver some type of self-aware meta commentary on poisonous fan service as a result of AI in the movie.
Damn, man. I you know what? I respect that. I really do, because that's the most interesting theory that I have heard as a response to why this film is the way it is. Because like to your point, it is one of those things where you do have to take a step back and you're trying to process how this happened. And these guys being who they are, you do have to consider the fact that it's like, okay, well, maybe this is all intentional.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, or maybe they just made a bad movie and they don't want to admit it.
I don't know, and I'm bringing this defense up not because I fully buy into it. I don't know if I buy into it.
No, that's fair.
It's the only way I feel like I can defend what this movie is doing. And JD, we sort of talked about this, or at least alluded to this when we reviewed Dead Reckoning back in 2023. Yeah. We talked about especially that final action sequence on the train fight between Gabriel and Ethan, which we know was shot practically. But the behind-the-scenes footage looks better than the movie itself. And we kind of wondered, is there something going on purpose to make that look very digitized because this is an AI-themed movie? Is that a stretch to say that they're purposely making this look worse because they're trying to prove that point? I don't necessarily buy into that, but with The Final Reckoning, I find myself looking at the script and thinking, was this done on purpose to say something about AI and the movie specifically? And I don't know. And it left me feeling so perplexed that for the past 24 hours, I've not been able to stop thinking about this movie.
Yeah. See,
I don't, for maybe the wrong reasons, but I don't know. It's a weird beast of a movie.
I can't buy that, as interesting as that theory is. I can't buy it for a couple of reasons. Mm-hmm. One, there's the filmmaking ethos that they present as far as this being cinematic. We want to get people in the theaters, and we want to save theaters, especially in a post-COVID world. I don't think that fundamental approach really services that. And also, I think that idea, at least that in context and how it's presented in the film, is extremely insipid. That's not interesting. That's not an interesting idea. Like, it's so thinly veiled in execution that I can't fathom that we're going to purposefully tank these two movies for an idea that we're going to spend a total of 12 minutes on in between the two movies. There's no way. If they were going to purposefully tank it, they would spend time on it, but they don't. They don't spend any time on it. The entity and Gabriel, by extension, in these two films are completely wasted. Completely wasted. Gabriel in this film is nothing more than a plot mechanism and nothing more. He was extremely frustrating to me as a character, given how he's set up in Dead Reckoning. The writing to this film is flatly awful. It's terrible. It's really messy. It collapses under its own ambition, if we can even call it that. And that, to me, is the problem. Honestly, I don't think this is overly complicated at all.
Yeah.
I
fully agree with you. Yeah.
They've talked about how they've spent years choreographing these action sequences and testing them to make sure that they can do them safely and do them in a way that's going to be enthralling on camera. And it is very clear that they spent years doing that, because the action spectacle, once we get to the submarine sequence and, of course, the airplane sequence at the end, it is electrifying. It is really great.
I agree.
The screenplay they wrote 3 days before they started shooting, because they spent years perfecting the action that they didn't have time to do anything else. And so they wrote a script days before they started shooting, and what we get are vacuous ideas, vapid characterization, and drama that is as hollow as it can get. Now, I think I do like this a little bit more than Dead Reckoning, even though I think Dead Reckoning is a better movie, but that one frustrates me more because of the previous movies that lead to it and how that film feels like a middle finger to those movies. So that one feels a little bit more mean-spirited, where this, to your point, Brennan, just feels like incompetence. It's just flatly incompetence, and I don't think it's overly complicated. And I think that's also why this feels more like an Avengers movie than it does a Mission Impossible movie, in the sense of how self-referential it is and the callbacks to emotional stakes in the previous entries, which I don't wholly dislike, but I think how this film ultimately uses those things, again, it just feels like it's shoehorning those things in for no other reason other than, again, we want to be a montage. This is the final reckoning. This is it. You have to trust me one last time. We're ending after this. And so it feels like an Avengers Infinity War. We're bringing the whole thing together in this final go around. And I don't think that really works here. And I think that approach also leads to the immense amount of exposition that we get, the full-blown flashbacks to explain what is being referenced. I mean, this is a film that does not trust you at all to know or have seen the previous movies. Yeah. And if you're going to approach this like the Avengers, I will at least give Marvel credit for that. They don't handhold in that regard. They will reference other movies, and if you get the joke, you get the joke, and if you don't, you don't. This is a film that wants to hold and feels the need to hold your hand as we talk about the Rabbit's Foot, or as we talk about other characters that have been in this franchise before. And it's lazy. It's lazy. It's overly convoluted. They spend no time in setting up these characters. They're all wasted to one degree or another. And I find that frustrating because I think the strength of this series is how it couples its action and staging with performance. That's what I've loved about Tom Cruise in these movies, is that all of the nuance around Ethan, it's not really in the writing. Some of it is, and there's some great exchanges over the course of these films for sure. But a lot of it is simply in how Cruise reacts. Cruise, one of his biggest strengths as a performer, I think, is in the understated look, the close-up on his face, and how he can convey emotion without saying anything. To me, that's why his performance in Mission Impossible 3 is not just the best of the franchise, but I think simply one of his best performances, period. I know a lot of people like to highlight the opening and his exchanges with Davian when he's overtly emotional, but what is often forgotten throughout that film are the many times JJ pauses that movie and just lets the camera linger on Cruise to convey emotion, where he says that is the best part of that film.
Mission Impossible 3. Yeah. What's so great about that movie, it's like watching a great superhero movie where you spend more time with the alter ego than the superhero. Because Mission Impossible 3 is more of an Ethan Hunt movie. And when it's functioning in that way, it is very powerful. There's some really good heartfelt stuff happening.
It's really great, which is, of course, what I loved about Fallout, because we finally go back to that. We bring the humanity back to Ethan. And as much as I appreciate and love Rogue Nation, there are ambiguities to that film, at least when it came out, that I had questions about. But with the way Fallout recontextualizes that movie, I do think Rogue Nation is an astounding compliment to 3 and Fallout.
Oh, for sure.
And even in Ghost Protocol and in the first film as well, like Cruise as a performer is able to do more to get underneath the surface level writing and plotting and action that we do see. And at times they do that here in The Final Reckoning. The problem is it is all discombobulated with everything else that's going on. So those moments simply ring hollow. And that really goes for every performer here. I think every performer has a few moments that in a vacuum are really good, but on the whole, it just feels like a giant mess that accumulates to nothing. And I walked out of the theater going, there are moments here I enjoyed for sure. I was thrilled in certain places. I was even moved in a few scenes, but it also felt like empty calories. I enjoyed it in the moment, but I walked out, and honestly, I had to write notes for this conversation because I had forgotten so much. Like it had left my brain soon after I left.
Well, I mean, that's 3 hours of just nothingness, right? Like it's just, it's really bloated and tedious. And I don't know. I think it's, I don't know how you guys feel, but I think it's kind of like an oppressive watch. Like there's nothing really, and I don't need my films to be like uplifting or triumphant or whatnot, but there is just like there's a bleakness to this movie that feels kind of out of step with everything that's come before. Like even De Palma's film, for example, is really seedy, really like infused with like De Palma's signature psychosexual stuff and like his voyeurism. And I think that film is great as like the anti James Bond, where it's like, this is the gross underbelly of espionage, and it works, and you're able to kind of enjoy that and sit with that and whatnot. Whereas like this, I mean, they're talking about such just like high, it's like armchair philosophy, right? Like it's sort of what it feels like they're talking about. and they keep repeating the same lines over and over again about this oath, about the choice and all and whatnot. And it's like, I get that, like, there is something interesting about the idea of the IMF being some like an organization where it's like you are offered a choice to do this mission or not. But it feels like they have zeroed in on this so much to the point where it's become so abstracted and so just blown out of proportion from what it actually is. So you get them kind of pontificating on these ideas, and I just, and like I'm someone who will sit there and like engage with stuff like that if it is interesting, but they're not really offering any insight aside from like, well, you know, we need to be doing these good things and whatnot. It's like we have the choice and moral obligation to do these things, and it's like, okay, cool,
yeah,
I get that.
Yeah, and given that heaviness of the film, it doesn't really feel like a Mission Impossible film, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't mind when sequels deviate from what their previous entries set up, but what made this franchise so interesting is that every time you got a new film, often you had a new director, but even with Christopher McQuarrie making a few films, every one of his films had a very unique stamp to them, and they had different agendas, different tonalities, different emotional cores, different thematic ideas. Yet they all still felt like Mission Impossible. Even a movie like Fallout, which at the time was probably the most brutal of these movies, still had a lot of fun. It still had a lot of fun to it. That was still a very funny movie.
And not to cut you off there, but I think the problem with this is that I remember when Fallout came out and they were talking about the fact that they figured out how to do this action oriented cinema, and they were like, they kind of got in with like a rough sketch of where the story was going to go, but then they were going to kind of figure it out and tailor it to the set pieces that they wanted to do. And I think that works for that film specifically because it is a POV movie. It is a incredibly simple story, and it is action driven. That movie is explosive. It doesn't stop. And it's like a Mad Max Fury Road sort of thing where it is this, you know, it's compelling. There's stuff there that you can chew on, but it is all conveyed through action.
Yeah.
With the Reckoning films, there are so many moving parts. There's so much that requires dialogue and conversations and conflict and characters to have stuff questioned, and it requires the touch that McQuarrie had in Rogue Nation in order for it to be compelling. And I think with these films and the Final Reckoning in particular, they felt that they could approach it in the same way that they did Fallout without recognizing that this is a more complex story. And then part of me is like, that's why they split it into two parts, because they couldn't figure it out. Because this is such a bloated story for absolutely no reason. And like, you could easily tell us in like one film.
There's a simplified version of this movie that actually maybe adds a bit more thematic ambiguity on the entity itself that could have been more interesting. And it certainly doesn't do that. What made Fallout so cool is that even though there was a story, there was dialogue, there was great dialogue, that movie was the closest to capturing the way people describe Tom Cruise as a modern day Buster Keaton. Because like the way that those films like The General, for instance, would be made, they were all formulated around these great death-defying stunts of the 1920s, and then they had a bit of a, you know, obviously a silent film and a story surrounding that. And Fallout was kind of made in the same way, but for a modern era. And there's a moment in Final Reckoning, well, actually two moments specifically. It's the two action sequences, and I'm sure we'll talk about how great that they are. They're great because they're silent. There's really no dialogue there. And it showcased that maybe there was a missed opportunity to make a Mission Impossible silent film. And really relish in just making it a long, maybe 90-minute extended sequence of just one task that Ethan has to complete in relation to whatever the story is. And it felt like this was flirting with that until it realized, maybe through studio notes or whatever it might be, that no, you need more of a movie here. It seems to be collapsing under that weight of what it was basically being forced to do.
Well, sorry. You can go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of missed opportunities and how bloated these two films are, one through line that has me wholly mystified in Dead Reckoning, we get these flashbacks that allude to
the
Hunt's
Maria
life before IMF.
Dude, oh my
And-
God, yeah.
Yeah, it alludes to some checkered past that he has that is pseudo connected to Gabriel in some way, and a woman who died, and we are left hanging at the end of that film. We have no idea what any of that means. And then we all assume that the final reckoning is going to pay that off, or at least give answers to those flashbacks. And it doesn't. There's one moment, one brief moment at the beginning of this film that simply reiterates the ambiguity of Dead Reckoning and that cryptic past, but it doesn't give any answers as to that connection or who the woman was. It simply just alludes to the fact that, okay, Ethan had a checkered past, perhaps criminal, and the IMF gave him some sort of moral righteous path, which, look, given the symbolism of him being the savior, sure, maybe that is the whole point. But again, it feels like we did all of that for no reason whatsoever. I think we just, given how Ethan is portrayed in all of these movies, we could assume that about him anyway. So why are you going out of your way in both of these films to give us that with absolutely no payoff at all?
I forgot her name was Marie. It's like that's the level of detail we're dealing with.
But we don't know who that is or her connection to Ethan.
Was this movie written by the entity? And I don't. I see that as a serious question.
I've seen people say that. It's so true. It's so true.
And maybe if the connection there, or if it's just to provide that, okay, he now has this moral righteous path. The one thing about Ethan in all of these films that I do appreciate that they commit to is him being this savior. And as thinly veiled as that symbolism is, I can't appreciate it in execution because, again, if we're going to go full on metaphor here, Jesus in the text, what do they talk about? All the stuff that he did, all the miracles that he did. That's it. We don't learn really much about his life outside of that, especially once he starts doing his sermons. So Ethan in these films more or less do the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's
He's a messianic figure. This movie is a religious propaganda movie. Is basically how it's
but it's still, but I think the insane thing about all of that is, like, you go back and watch the first Mission Impossible, and he's such a sleaze. Like, he's such like he's someone who's like grappling with like the morals. Well, and actually not even grappling. He doesn't really seem to mind the moral, like the questionable morals of being a spy. Like it's kind of alluded to the fact that he sleeps with Phelps's wife, knowing that she that she is involved in the plot or whatever like that. Like there's a that, I think that's what's so great about that scene is, like, they are both aware of the fact that Phelps is still alive, but they are still going through with this really
they're playing this rouge. I mean, like, that's why these movies are all about movie making. They're basically acting. It's
totally. And I think the idea of these movies being about movie making, I think, has been there from the beginning for sure. Specifically the idea with The Mask and like what The Mask allows someone like Ethan Hunt to do, what kind of how it affects his personality, and then how that kind of channels into Tom Cruise and like why he is drawn to acting and such. And I don't know, somewhere along the way they lost what, like, that whole thing. I mean, I have to imagine it was when Christopher McQuarrie wrote, like, he's the living manifestation of destiny. It just felt like which is a great line, like, and it's really funny in the context of the film, but it just felt like he was so proud of that line and then decided to make 3 movies, really 2 movies, because I mean, like, Fallout deals with that, but to a lesser extent, but like 2 movies that are solely about this.
Yeah. But took it seriously this time around. There was something kind of self-aware and silly about its inclusion in Rogue Nation, as if to kind of comment on the actual insanity of Ethan Hunt.
Yes, like,
which I loved. I loved.
Yeah, totally. And it's being delivered by Alec Baldwin with such conviction, and it's like all of these elements, like, it makes for a really fun laugh at that moment. And yeah, I think that's the problem here is like the second these films started to take themselves too seriously, started to overvalue just like how invested people were in the characters and not necessarily the dynamic between the actors or the the shenanigans, the hijinks they're getting up to and whatnot. When they started to just blow all that stuff up when they started buying the own mythology that they created, that's when these movies, I think, started to lose their way.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which I don't necessarily mind. I don't mind that approach, especially given that we're dealing with nuclear fallout and war and the devastating consequences that would come from that. That is a dire tone for sure. However, and again, going back to the missed opportunity angle of it, if you couple that with Ethan having to wrestle with his role as the Messiah, then you have something really interesting. And you can do that within the same framework that you've done with all of these other movies where there's still lots of action. He's still having to save people, perhaps more people than ever, given the stakes of what's at play, given what the entity wants to do. But these two films refuse to do so. Instead, it gets bogged down and, well, we got to introduce Grace, who ultimately becomes a nothing character. And nothing against Atwell. I think she's a great performer, but I think the writing of that character in both of these films are feeble at best. And all she becomes is an Ursula replacement without having the same dynamic. Earlier, Griffin, I think you brought up the potential romanticism between her and Ethan. Yeah. I'm glad they don't go full on with it, but it's there enough that it is immensely frustrating. When you're off the heels of Isla's death in the last one, and you have this ripe opportunity given the end of Fallout and the closure he finally gets with Julia, and that's how you pay off that character, only to introduce this new one who, in Dead Reckoning, Grace wants nothing to do with Ethan. She undermines him at every turn. She is not interested in him at all until she is forced to make a decision by joining the IMF or go to jail. Like, those are her two decisions.
Yeah.
Okay, not much of a choice there, really. So the writing of Grace, I think, is disingenuous. And in this film, she doesn't really do all that much. She's mostly a plot device there to help out Ethan and the IMF throughout this whole thing. So, I mean, going back to your point, I don't mind the tone if the writing allowed Ethan to materialize him wrestling with his role in all of this. If the film had done that with its tone, we would be talking about two of the best, if not the two best Mission Impossible movies. But it just doesn't do that. In fact, to your point, Brennan, it's like it's actively refusing to do it because we have to be about AI, or it's got to somehow point back to the entity in these really hollow ways that don't really lead to anything all that compelling. And I want to like this film. I want to like Dead Reckoning because, again, there are elements. I've been really down on this film in this conversation. There are elements I really do like.
Yeah, I mean, like the two set pieces are like fantastic. I mean, like they are. Like the biplane sequence is just the helicopter sequence from Fallout, but like there is no denying that it is an impressive feat of stunt work. The problem is that I don't think it has the narrative weight or the emotional weight of what was going on in Fallout. So it just feels a bit.
I agree.
It's a bit of just like a superficial recreation of that. The genuine the best moments I think is the Sevastopol dive, because that's when mood and tone and atmosphere and everything really seeps into the picture and it becomes this like haunting dive like into the world that essentially births a spy like Ethan Hunt, and like he's going in there to retrieve this original source code and whatever, and he comes back out of it with clarity and such. And like that is playing into like a lot of the religious ideas and whatnot, but also it's just like a very, very effective set piece. I mean, I know that they've been talking about the fact that they like did it for real, that they built all this stuff and whatnot. Like, that's cool. Like, that's a cool marketing trick. I don't really care. I mean, especially because this sequence is literally just like there's a sequence similar to this in Tomorrow Never Dies. And I think,
oh, sure. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I mean, like, this obviously has more grandeur and it's newer and whatnot, but like, you know, I've seen something like this before done to great effect. And seeing how McQuarrie likes to crib that film without admitting it is it's always amusing to me.
It's probably my favorite of the Pierce Brosnan Bond films, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Look, I get it. It probably, given the day, it could be mine too. I adore that.
I think it's a very underrated Bond film.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's probably aged the best out of all of them.
Oh, sure.
Its handling of the media and whatnot. But I think the thing is like yeah, those two set pieces are genuinely like fantastic, incredible craftsmanship. But it also takes so goddamn long to get to the point where he is diving down. It's like you're sitting there just waiting for literally anything to happen. Yeah. And
it's like at the 2-hour mark.
I know.
It's like half the movie. But the thing is, like, I actually, when he gets on that, I forget the name of that first sub before he actually makes the dive to the Sevastopol, but it's when, Tremel Tillman as Captain Bledsoe comes into play.
Yeah.
Some of the interactions with those characters, Kitty O'Brien's also part of that as well.
Yeah, they're fun.
I thought that was fun. And it's interesting that there's a certain point when the movie started to bring me in and kind of, I wouldn't say win me over necessarily, but it's when it feels like the entity has less control over what Ethan is about to do. And that kind of goes back into my, again, I don't want to call it a defense because I don't know if I buy into this whole idea that the movie was purposely being bad just for the sake of proving a point on AI as it infiltrates the movies. But it is a weird coincidence when you couple this with Dead Reckoning as well. When the entity itself seems to have the most control, the movies themselves start to suffer. It's just kind of a weird thing. And the second that Ethan captures that module that they have to use to defeat this, the movie started to feel like a movie all of a sudden to me. At least more so than the first half.
They staged that for years. They knew what to do with those sequences.
But even
it's the writing around everything else they didn't do until the last minute.
Even some, not all of it, but even some of the character banter started to feel a little bit more organic than it did in that first half.
Yeah, I mean, Tremel Tillman felt like an actual character. I mean, like, now you can argue that he's just kind of riffing on Mr. Milchek from Severance.
But he absolutely is. But yeah,
at the same time, it's like
fun.
He's playing someone. Right, yeah, he's fun. He's a lively presence.
Very much so.
Which is insane because we've got an entire team of people that Ethan should be interacting with and having fun with. And again, I'm not like one of those, I hate sounding like this. I'm not one of those people where it's like, well, I need this movie to be fun. I need quips and blah. It's like, no, I don't need any of that. I just need these characters to have their respective personalities, and they've lost that. Like,
or
Benji,
commit to something. Commit to something. I'm okay with its dire tone if they did something with Ethan, as we talked about. That's fine. Commit to that. Then I don't need the fun necessarily. I can deal with bleak if you commit to it. The problem is the film wants to have its cake and eat it too.
Absolutely.
And it struggles mightily to do so.
Yeah. You know what's funny is the one thing that was so eye-rolling to me going into the movie that actually worked was Dunlow. That was like, as a character and bringing him back, I was like, oh, this is really compelling. I mean, like, yes, he is essentially filling the Luther role, and you could have easily just, kept Luther around because I think his death is pointless. It adds nothing to it. I felt no emotion when he died. And so, there's that. But if you're going to have that older veteran tech guy presence in there, look, kudos to them. They made a Glup Shido actually work in a way that didn't have it feel like a Glup Shido. I think I
thought it was kind of touching.
It was very, very touching. Yeah. And I thought, I can't remember the actor's name, but he was so, like, I don't know. He really did such a great job.
Rolf Saxon, who plays William Dunlow, I believe.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, he gave a great performance in that.
He was good. I enjoyed it.
To a character who was nothing more than like a poop and throw up joke in the first film. Like, they actually made him an important character.
Yeah.
I know. Pretty
The
wild.
only thing that I didn't like about him was when he was like, Ethan, if you hadn't, got me like exiled to wherever the hell here, that I wouldn't.
A little too easy.
Right, they let him off the hook. Like, and going back to what you were saying, JD, like this is the thing with these last two movies, is they never question Ethan. He is always let off the hook because he's perfect. He's always right, and that's not interesting. If his biggest flaw is that he is so concerned about the people around him and saving the world, that he is, just willing to do whatever it takes to make these things happen, there are going to be unintended consequences to that. I think Fallout deals in that. It's like, it's literally what the movie is about. Not only about like nuclear fallout, but like the fallout of his actions, of being this person who cannot stand idly by while something is happening. It's like there are things that you can do to challenge him on that. And I think in something like Rogue Nation, Ilsa is a presence there to challenge him on that. She's sort of like, look, I have worked for the state. I have been thrown under the bus by the state. I have worked for the enemy who is rebelling against the state, and they've done the same thing to me. We are fighting. We are just cogs in a machine, and the best option for us is to walk away because we're just going to wind up dead. And I think Ethan makes a very conscious decision there to not walk away. He contemplates it for a second, but he's like, I am physically unable to walk away because it is so deeply ingrained in me. It is my conviction. And so I have to see all of this through. And that's, something they interrogate in Fallout a bit, but I think it's something they could have interrogated further in these films, because at that moment, he makes that decision to not get out. He is set on a trajectory to me to eventually die, right? Like it is the only way that this whole thing could come to an end. Like, at some point, there were I can't remember which film it was, but I know he's been called like a gambler in previous films. People are I think Lane calls him a gambler for like what he does. He doesn't really like see what he's doing as like carefully thought and planned out. And, obviously Lane is wrong to extent, but this idea of Ethan being a gambler whose luck has run out, I think there was a perfect opportunity here for him to save the day at the expense of his own life. Now, you could argue whether or not that's too similar to what happened to Bond in No Time to Die.
Probably why they tried to avoid it. I think they wanted to get away from the comparisons.
100%, because it was fully set up for him, for his like parachute to fail. It's like, this is the only way this guy is going to die, is if just a freak thing happens while he's in the middle of doing these stunts, which, going back to like the movie making comparison, realistically, that is the only way Tom Cruise stops making movies, is if he just happens to die in one of these scenarios. And so like I think that's really interesting. And while the end for that character may have been similar to James Bond in No Time to Die, I think their deaths they thematically represent something very different. Bond was stuck in an occupation that he hated, but he kept getting back in because he's just like, he has a moral compass to do something, but he like kept wanting to get out. He didn't know anything else. And then, Madeline and his daughter gave him something to live for and a reason to die. And so he sacrificed himself so that they could live on. In the case of this with Ethan, his whole thing is that he is just incapable of standing idly by. Like he has to help people because he cares too much about his friends, because he has this, I don't know, self-imbued sense of self-righteousness or whatever. Like he just has
He's
a very
Jesus.
strong,
Just say it.
Right.
He's Jesus.
I'm trying not to say it. He's not Jesus. I'm not calling Tom Cruise Jesus.
And honestly, his death would have actually maybe
Ethan,
solidified those ideas
Tom.
that you mentioned. I mean, his death may have solidified those ideas you were talking about earlier, JD, about just committing to that like messianic kind of idea. It certainly could have paralleled that even further. And what you're talking about there, Griffin, it leads to a question I wanted us to ponder on. This is being at least marketed as the final Mission Impossible film. Do we buy that? Just given the way that it goes, like does it feel that way? Because I honestly don't even think it really does.
I would say yes up until the final 2 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And
I
then
agree.
it kind of leaves again, and that's my frustration of this film. It just can't commit to anything.
Well,
and
we
can bring up every single scene in this entire film, and I will always, that'll be my comeback to everything. Will you please goddamn commit to something? Because the whole movie, it's about, this is the last time. I need you to trust me one last time. The stakes have never been higher. The tone has never been more bleak. This is it. This is the last one. Tom Cruise is 62 years old. We're going out on a high. And then you get to the final 2 minutes of the film. Spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen it yet. And then we're left with this ambiguous, well, maybe we'll come back. Maybe.
Yeah.
It's not even just that. You have this, on its own terms, a rather touching monologue from Luther that he apparently recorded this poison pill, as they call it, with. And what he ends up saying to Ethan is essentially just a regurgitation of what Angela Bassett says at the end of Fallout. It doesn't really add anything new to the finality, or at least the perceived finality of this movie, which made me think by the end, and the end credits started rolling, it's like, this just felt like another Mission Impossible film to me. And certainly not as good as a lot of the best of the series, as we've been talking about, but I didn't feel like there was this sense of finality by the end. And given the response that this one is receiving from a lot of, at least critics, I don't know how audiences are going to go for it. We'll see how that trickles out in the next coming days. But I wouldn't be surprised if in like 5 or 10 years or so, McQuarrie and Cruise get back together and say, no, we got to perfect this. We got to do something better. But
are they going to do that because of the response to this, or because there's more story to be told? That to me will be the difference.
That's a dangerous thing. Well, what if they were to come out in a few years and say, "Yep, we screwed this up. We screwed the pooch on the final reckoning, on this whole reckoning."
Because I think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be that. I mean, I don't care if you leave it ambiguous, but you walk away, because I think they should. Again, Tom Cruise is 62 years old.
Yeah,
I think
true.
You can reboot this franchise. You don't have to stop it, but I think it is time for a new Ethan. As much as I enjoy Tom Cruise as that character, I think the difference between you and I, Brennan, is I really did feel throughout the majority, like 98% of this film, that this was the last one. That was what they were conveying through most of it, until you get to the end. And then it's everything you guys are talking about as well. Ethan's not going to die. Of course, his parachute comes out. He lands. He walks away. Everything's fine. I meet up with the team. And hey, maybe we'll get together in another 2 years. Like that. That is how it feels at the end. But it did feel as if the film was trying to convey, again, maybe if only to convey stakes, but it did want to
that's the thing,
pump up that, this is the end of the world. And I think it does that effectively. I just wish that, for all the reasons we talked about earlier, it did more to utilize that. But the ending, I do think, is a bit of a cheap out that the film didn't really warrant or earn.
Well, that's I think one of the things that struck me walking out of the movie was that it doesn't, in many ways, but specifically in terms of the ending, does not commit to its ideas, because they want to leave that door open in case Tom Cruise is like, oh, my other ventures aren't really working out, so I can always just come back and do this, and that'll be like the thing.
It's a safety blanket is basically what it is.
And we saw that with Ghost Protocol, right? Because that was supposed to be the film that he originally exited the series from, and they were setting up like Jeremy Renner to be the new lead in that movie and whatnot. Yep. And it ends in a similar way to this movie. And we all saw what happened with that, where he went on to make like, 4 other movies or something like that.
Yeah.
So to me, it felt like he wanted to have this as a safety blanket in case he ever needed to come back to it, which I think is so like so lame. It's so spineless. Because to your point, JD, yes, I got that. I think part of the reason this movie felt so oppressive was because they were like, this is the end. We're gonna dial up the stakes. We're gonna like every single moment is gonna have the weight of its world. Every decision is gonna have the weight of its world, like resting on it. And then it just kind of is just like, well, we end it like we do every other Mission Impossible. And then I think the other thing that's like, I mean, this is such like a minute thing, but like, why does he have to keep the entity? Why did they not kill the entity? Like, was that not? And this is
that's all I talked about for 2 movies. We
had
to kill it.
I know.
They put it in a stick of butter by the end. That's what my wife kept saying to me.
It's maddening because I think that there was a version of this that actually gave the entity a lot more empathy, where it was a case where like Ethan realizes that the entity is the way it is because of human error, because of the things that
it wasn't
we did.
its fault.
Yeah, right. We did to create it. It's like we created this mess, but this thing as a sentient program or whatever is not at fault. And so part of me is like, he could not kill that because of his own kind of like moral consciousness. And maybe like there's a version of this where they have more conversations and we get to know the entity as a sentient thing a bit more. I mean, there's like literally cults in this movie that worship the entity. I mean, they talk about the entity being an anti-god, which is just really stupid because like that was an offhand thing that Simon Pegg said in 3 that was from his professor. It's not actually what this thing is supposed to be. It was just shorthand.
Well, then it becomes that thing when this becomes a literal tie to the rabbit's foot.
Exactly right, that's a whole literal. Other just stupid thing. But like, there's these cults that worship this thing. They're like, this thing does not see itself as being wrong. It sees itself as doing the right thing, similar to Ethan. And so you would think there would be a moment where Ethan recognizes that, he sees that humanity, if you will, in the entity, and that's why he does not want to kill it, but rather wants to contain it.
You do know you just wrote the next movie, right, Griffin? You just wrote the next movie.
Honestly,
but that's what this should have been. That's honestly, what should have been.
In a
the
way,
next one's going to open with the entity talking to Ethan and giving him his mission. Do you choose to accept? And now it's part of the good guys.
In a way, just like giving it more of a perspective. What you essentially just described there, Griffin, was Avengers: Age of Ultron. In some way.
For real, right? What does this thing want? We have no idea what its goal is. It eventually just boils down to like, nuclear annihilation or ridding the world of its technology so that it's the only technology or whatever. Like, it's
very
vague.
Basic.
It is very basic. The overarching thing is that it's just like nuclear annihilation, which first of all, how many movies in this franchise does that have to be the main plot point? Like, I get it, a lot of heightened spy fiction deals in that sort of thing, but like, we're not in the Cold War. There are current events around that you can incorporate in to create something here that's different. And so like, to their point, like, in their defense, the entity is that different alternative. That is a technological threat that we face. And then they felt so insecure about it that they made it devoid of a personality, devoid of a motivation, and then just made it like, basically a stand-in for nuclear annihilation.
This is why the only way I could potentially defend this movie is by going back to the idea that this was all done on purpose, as if this is Tom Cruise's way and Christopher McQuarrie's way of saying, you guys realize that this is what'll happen if AI infiltrates the movies. You'll get this type of Mission Impossible. Again, I don't buy that necessarily. It's like, it had me wondering if this movie is doing less of a Rise of Skywalker thing and more so like an Alien Covenant type thing, where its creator kind of infused its own anger and resentment of the franchise into the actual movie. I think that's more successful at tapping into that idea, but I don't know.
But here, the only other thing is that they kind of arrive at the point that we need to be kinder to one another, right? Like, that's the whole thing behind the choice, is like, we need to look out for everyone for this collective good, which is another reason why I feel like an original version of this was Ethan being a bit more empathetic towards the entity and coming to understand that, because that is the entire thing, is that we need to set aside tribalism and stuff like that and come together for this unifying good. And like that's cool. Like whatever, you can have that as your message. It's a bit like, kumbaya and whatever, but like that's fine. But where is the buildup to that idea? It is something that is introduced at the very end, like in Luther's like final monologue, which is just reciting the IMF creed, which first of all, that's insane that they have a fucking creed or an oath or whatever. Like that is, again, never beating the cult allegations. But like it's like there is nothing prior to this that is, teeing that up, and then they loosely try and like rope the Jim Phelps Jr. into that, and it's like, is that the only reason that you created that character, was to have the whole idea be that like he forgives Ethan? It's like, dude,
it's so bad.
You should know your dad was a fucking awful person.
This movie literally has a somehow Palpatine return moment.
Seriously,
and I heard
yeah.
inklings of that, not this specific reveal, but I heard little rummages from people that this has a certain reveal that really annoy some people, and I guess I was looking for it. And when that thing happened, I rarely verbalize anything while watching a movie in the theater. I groaned so loudly.
Dude,
my wife told me to be quiet.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a new T-shirt that says "Somehow Jim Phelps returned."
You
so
need
good.
to. You absolutely
Jim
need
Phelps
to.
Jr., dude. That is insane.
Yeah,
it's like,
that's
dude,
dumb. Yeah.
Well, it's because it's also a thing where it's like Shea Wiggum is not a young buck, right? Like he's an older guy, and like if you go back like 30 years, and he's like probably in his like 20s or 30s or something like that. Like this dude is clearly aware of like right and wrong, and like can obviously see that his dad was like not a good person, and yet he's like, well, you killed my dad, and you think that you're always right. Well, you have you always have consequences and whatever. And this is the whole issue with Ethan, is you have characters like that. You have characters like Brant in Rogue Nation. You have characters like Ilsa and Lane, who tell Ethan that he is perhaps not as straight and narrow as he would like to think, that his actions do have consequences, but then it stops. Like Ethan himself never considers that, because he either has Luther sticking up for him and being like, don't question Ethan, he always knows what he's talking about, or like the film just comes down on the side that Ethan is always right no matter what, therefore how dare you question him. And that's ridiculous. That's so ridiculous. Like if you wanted to do the Jim Phelps Jr. thing, I think it's really stupid, but there is a compelling way to do that in having Ethan question his self-righteousness, and they never do that. Like, again, like going back to what you were saying, JD, like he is never questioned. He never questions himself. He is always let off the hook. He is he is a perfect person. And to me, that is not an interesting an interesting protagonist,
which is unfortunate, because there were layers to Ethan in previous movies that showcase flaws.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this whole reckoning experience is not reckoning with that.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
Well, it doesn't reckon with any of Ethan at all.
No, not at all.
And that's the biggest problem. And you couple that with its Avengers-like approach, such as a Jim Phelps reveal. Like, why do we need that? What is the point of that? Like,
unless it was written by AI,
or the Hannah Waddingham character. Like, what was the point of that?
Pointless.
Too? Like,
absolutely pointless. Also, the thing with the Jim Phelps character is like, I thought those two made good at the end of Dead Reckoning. Why is there this weird rift between them? Like he let him go because he finally he got that Ethan was in the right, that he was trying to do something good.
He's playing a different character here.
He's playing a completely different character. Completely different character.
Sense.
I mean, that's the case with a lot of these, characters. Like we mentioned earlier, they're not the same people as we know them to be, but especially not from how we know them to be in the last film.
Yeah, I agree.
We are going a little long here. I do want to start to wind down as we do. I do want to bring up a few things that I did like because, boy, this has been a really negative conversation, and there's not much for me to bring up that I do like, but there are a few things. The one thing I will disagree with you on, Griffin, is that I did like the Ving Rhames sequence. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, Ving Rhames is maybe my MVP in all of these films. He's so great. I love Luther. He's one of the best elements in all of these films. And I do think he's really great in this film, as limited as his screen time is. And I think the reason his sequence works for me, it's a little bit of that Iron Man Infinity War thing where Infinity War doesn't really earn the emotion of Tony Stark's death on its own terms. It is the previous films doing most of the heavy lifting there, because we had seen Tony countless times in all of those movies. And it's a lot of that here. It's Rhames' performance in the context of this film. That is certainly part of it. But it is the previous films and how great he is and how much we come to love him that does so much of the heavy lifting. So I was moved by that sequence here just because I love that character a lot.
Sure.
Yeah,
And
that's fair.
while the dialogue he delivers at the end of the film, to your point, Brennan, redundant, again, there's just something about Rhames' performance that, and like there's such a sincerity, like a genuine love that he pours into that performance as far as Luther to Ethan that I think is undeniable. So I do really love the Ving Rhames of it all, again, as limited as it is here. I think the cyanide sequence is really great. That's classic Ethan Hunt, and we did that in the first half of the film, so I wanted to highlight that. And we somewhat touched over this briefly. We haven't really gone into it deeply, but that airplane sequence, I think, is arguably the most insane thing he's done in all of these films, because he's 62 years old, and you can see the G-forces on him in those maneuvers, and it is almost hard to fathom. It is incredible. Like he borderline passes out like 2 or 3 different times on camera. Yeah. It is unreal, which again goes to demonstrate how fantastical all of this is, because in that situation, Ethan just simply falls off that plane because he's going to pass out at those speeds and with those maneuvers. But cinematically, I think that's also what makes it enthralling, seeing those G-forces very practically on him, where it looks like his face is going to fall off, because he's pulling like 5-6 Gs on some of those maneuvers. It is truly remarkable the way they capture all of that in camera. So like, again, we've come to expect this in a lot of ways from Tom Cruise. I don't know if any of it starts to wear off a little bit, but I was pretty blown away by that sequence, just simply with how they captured it.
I was too.
And at that age especially, like it's tough for anyone off the streets to go into one of those planes and handle those G-forces the way that he does, let alone at that age. I know he does this all the time. He loves to fly those planes. I will always be jealous of Tom Cruise that he has his own P-51 Mustang. If he wants to sell it to me, I'll gladly take it. But still, it's incredible. It's noteworthy. And, I have to bring it up. It truly was spectacular.
I will say this about that sequence as well. Although I still don't like the character of Gabriel. I think he's a very bland villain.
Yeah, that's a nothing element of that whole
nothing
thing.
element of the movie, but he does have a spectacular death. He really does.
Oh yeah, that was a good death. Yeah.
But I think again, maybe it's like the movie almost seems aware of how lame of a character he is, so they kill him off in a way as if to say, "Yeah, we know he sucks. This is how he's gonna go."
Yeah.
But I thought his death was pretty satisfying.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
I think the thing that did it for me was like right before that, like Esai Morales just completely abandons what little character, Gabriel had. I don't know if that was how he was being directed, but he starts making choices, starting with that car chase out of the tunnel, where I'm just like, dude, is this Tommy Lee Jones from Batman Forever? Because you're giving that kind of energy. It was
the energy
like,
completely shifts. It absolutely does.
It was like total
really
Two-Face. I was like, this is fucking nuts. Like, this is like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when the entity abandons you, your only choice is to ham it up. That's what you do.
That's so true. Yeah. I mean, we didn't even talk about the fact that like the entity just kind of like abandons Gabriel, and then Gabriel is just like, well, now I want to control the entity, and he just
it's ridiculous.
He starts acting like
so
a kid who
dumb.
just lost his mommy or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The entity abandons Gabriel, and so does the film. Like it just,
and that's why, I mean, maybe to your point, Brennan, I don't know. I found his death extremely lame, but that's also appropriate to the character because he's lame in this film. Like there's nothing to him. There's nothing to his death. It means little. There's no substance. There's no stakes to it. He just dies. That's it. Like, he
dies in the most comical way. It's like I've got a parachute and you don't. Yay, I'm out of here. Splat.
It's so ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, like there's so many transitions within this movie that transition off of a joke, which is why I almost feel like there's this weird self-awareness to it that, again, I can't really defend. It just made me think about this movie in a way that no other mission film has really made me think about things before.
Yeah, sure.
And it's even the transition to the opening titles. You can tell a lot about a Mission Impossible film based on how that first scene instantly transitions to the opening titles. And in here, The Final Reckoning, it transitions off of what essentially is a slapstick joke, given the whole killing spree of Ethan Hunt in a way that almost feels like out of a Halloween movie.
Wait. Can we talk about that? That was the moment. That was the moment where Christian Bale's Tom Cruise is Patrick Bateman analogy came full force. I was like, that was so fucking weird. Like it came out of nowhere, and like I get it's played for a joke, and it's probably just like them thinking like it's a funny shtick, but like, dude, Ethan's a fucking psychopath. Like, why did you just like mutilate these? Like, you didn't just kill these people, you fucking butchered them like a goddamn serial killer. What is wrong with you? And it was just like, and then we're supposed to lionize this guy like throughout the rest of the film. You like hacked it.
It's just like the way it literally within 30 seconds after that sequence is when we get the opening titles. It's like, okay, so it's going to be this kind of movie. Okay.
Yeah.
What a weird thing.
So deeply weird. Like went full American Psycho. It was
so strange.
Just insane.
As we've very lengthily and eloquently put, we're not big fans of this movie, but in a weird, I weirdly like talking about this one. It's the weirdest Mission Impossible film.
It is a weird movie.
It is very weird.
In a day and age where I kind of give more passes than I should to movies, just have that have a weirdness to them. I'm not going to be doing that here necessarily, but I kind of feel this weird urge to start defending the movie just because it is such a strange beast. It's just so odd, but I love talking about it, honestly.
No, this has been great. It's been very like therapeutic, honestly, because like the only other person I've talked to about this film is my friend that I work on film speak videos with, and we've been going back and forth just about this whole thing because he hates this movie like me. But it's nice to talk with just like people outside of our little collaboration to be like, oh shit. Okay, so this is not just like a bubble that he and I are in. Like this is like we're all on the same page here and are thinking the exact same things at these moments.
Yeah.
No, I'm totally with you, and I've come down, I think, on the film more in this conversation.
Well, interestingly, me too, and I think I've risen dead ranking a little bit.
Honestly, I think that's where I've landed. I mean, again, when I walked out of the theater, I enjoyed parts of it for sure, but I was frustrated by it, very mixed on it. And now that we've had this conversation and I've been able to linger on it for almost a week now, I think I'm getting even more frustrated with the film because it's very disjointed on its own terms, but also it feels so disconnected from even Dead Reckoning. Like it just doesn't want to address anything in that film. And as ironically, as much as this film wants to pander again in Avengers-like way to the franchise at large, I feel like it does, like it's doing that so superficially. It doesn't want to really wrestle with Ethan's legacy. If anything, it just wants to heighten again that Jesus-like symbolism to him. And
at least Dead Reckoning felt like a movie.
Yeah, by comparison, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a film that has a couple of genuinely spectacular set pieces and really nothing else. Very little.
Right.
Again, there are a few things here and there that I liked, but.
Yeah, I mean, and look, that's the thing. I think we can appreciate those sequences in isolation and admire them for the feats of filmmaking and stunt work that they are. But, I mean, I go to films to watch stories be told, to feel something. And in the case of this movie, I'm not really getting that. I'm not there's so much exposition. There's so many flashbacks to things there's so much just repetition of the same dialogues phrased slightly differently. It's just kind of a big nothing sandwich it's a bit pretentious. I hate to bring that word out, but it feels a bit pretentious just in terms of how it views itself and the story that it's telling and how it's choosing to tell it. It's 3 hours, man. It's asking so much.
Well, and I think that's maybe the fundamental problem, because if this is a film that wants to be ostentatious, again, I feel like the film should commit to that. And where it doesn't is where it's constantly, and by I mean constantly, I mean almost in every scene, it is hand-holding the audience. It does not trust you to understand anything. It doesn't trust you to comprehend what it's aiming for, if it is aiming for anything. It treats the audience like they're 10. And that you've never seen any of the previous movies.
That's why I brought up the Alien Covenant comparison, because this is actually a very cynical and nihilistic movie when compared to many of the others in the franchise. And say what you will about Dead Reckoning, there's at least still a bit of a sincerity to that one. And sincerity is where this franchise really thrives, if you ask me. And even that movie is, weirdly, the more we talk about The Final Reckoning, I'm starting to rank Dead Reckoning higher on my list.
Join the club. Let's go.
I think I've landed there.
Let's go, boys. All right, there we go. Yes.
I need to rewatch that one again now. I'm going to rewatch it again post Final Reckoning and see if I end up coming around on it like other people have. I don't know if I will, but this whole Reckoning experience has just been weird. It has been weird.
I mean, like here's the thing. They whether or not they're going to call these a part 1 and part 2 is beside the point. It's a part 1 and a part 2. And on a very simple, just sort of baseline, your part 1 is where you set up all your dominoes, set up all your characters, your plot points, and everything like that. And part 2 is where you knock them down, right?
Yes.
This movie does not knock down those dominoes. It like swaps out other dominoes and then kind of tries to knock it down and makes a mess.
This was like fitting a square peg through a round hole.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So like, even just as a it fails as a sequel to that previous film, which it is, and it fails as a culmination of this 30-year journey that they like try and like bring together in the last film. It's just you don't need to do that.
Which brings us back to, if they come back, it's because they want to fix what they've done.
No, it's because of the money. No. It's because he has nothing else going on and he needs money. He needs work. Yeah,
that's true.
This movie needs to make a lot to do well, though.
Right? Yeah, $400 million is nuts. That's insane.
But Tom Cruise, doesn't he has something else coming out soon, doesn't he? Or that
isn't he working with Inarritu next year?
Inarritu, that's it.
Yeah, that's his next film.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, when you're working with Inarritu, that's never going to be a moneymaker. But if he enjoys that experience, maybe that'll transition him into a new phase in his career. I'm okay with Mission Impossible keep going. I'm at the point now where they need to reboot this. I don't care how unsuccessful the Reckoning films are.
Yeah.
You ended it where you did. It's done. It's over with. Let's get a new Ethan in there.
Does it necessarily have to be a reboot or even just still in continuity, but maybe Ethan isn't necessarily the one doing the stunts anymore? It's maybe a new team. Maybe he's like the new Jim Phelps that doesn't go bad in this case.
Yeah. Sure.
I do think there is a missed opportunity here for him to follow the same trajectory as Jim Phelps. Like, I think there is something interesting just about these guys who have been in this fight for so long and feel, I mean, he was disavowed by his government Ethan has been disavowed by his government for so long. And, what does that do to a person? And I think there was a interesting angle to maybe have him break bad here. I don't know how many people would have liked that, but I would have found it to be
interesting. Yeah.
Well, maybe if he takes on that role, maybe he'll be the villain of the next movie.
Could be fun.
Could
be fun. Look, they just need if they're going to be like, this is the American James Bond, then follow the pattern of James Bond. We've had the Cruise era. Let's get another actor in there and play
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
We had a different Superman 10 years ago. Like, it wasn't even that long ago.
I know.
Like, it's okay. You can do that. You can recast the role. It's been 30 years. It's fine.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and end it there. Griffin, thanks so much for being here. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, dude, this is, like I said, this was very therapeutic. I thoroughly enjoyed talking about this with you guys. I think
it was so great having you here.
It was great being here. Thank you
awesome.
guys so much. I would love to do it again.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're welcome here anytime, my friend. Tell us about Film Speak, all the fun stuff you do online. Where can we follow your work and find you on social media?
Yeah, for sure. If you guys like, video essays, analysis, and just kind of like deep dives into films, both, older films and new releases, you can go check out the Film Speak channel. We've been, we do those kinds of videos there. And then if you just want more of my casual off the cuff thoughts, you can follow me on Twitter at Griff Schiller or Letterboxd at Griff Schiller. Threads at Griff Schiller. All of my socials should just be at Griff Schiller if you want to just get my casual thoughts on stuff.
Yeah, I cannot recommend Film Speak enough on
Agreed.
YouTube. Please go watch it.
Especially if you're a James Bond fan.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's very kind. Yeah.
You had an awesome Nolan video last year, a few years ago. I can't remember. I think it was when Oppenheimer came out?
Was it the video on Oppenheimer?
I'm trying to recall. I think it was. That
one
was really great.
Video. Yeah.
Last year, the Wild Robot video was really fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And even recently, I watched it earlier today, your catharsis on the Disney slop and the because you were talking about Lilo and Stitch was really funny.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I still have to see that movie.
Don't. Just watch the original one instead. Thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that, especially with the Stitch one, because I did that, honest to God, off the cuff, just like, all right, let's just spew some bullshit here. This movie didn't really put the thought and care into making it a good adaptation, so I'm not really going to put the time and energy into making this a proper video. So it was, I don't know. It's fun to do those little like off the cuff sort of things every now and then.
And it definitely felt that way, because you could tell that you're like, I have a lot of thoughts here. This is immensely frustrating. I got to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad it was enjoyable.
That passion really comes through. It just you seem to love what you do, and that's what makes it such a great listen.
No, I really appreciate that. That's very kind. I do love what I do. But I mean, hey, you guys are stop. You guys got to give yourself some flowers. Like, you guys are amazing with this podcast and everything. And you have a lot of passion, and you clearly love what you guys do. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Brendan and I, we've been at this for over 10 years now, with Brendan here specifically.
Yeah,
and I love it. Like, even if no one ever listened to the show, I think I would just come here to talk to Brendan. Like,
oh, sure. It's
a great time.
This is basically our like movie beer talk, is what it feels like sometimes.
Yeah.
I like. I'm wearing a shirt right now that says "Movies are my expensive form of therapy," and it's derived from essentially the motto of this show, and it's the old Tim Burton quote that movies are an expensive form of therapy, which we've taken to also say so is podcasting.
Honestly, dude, there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah.
and that's it. Like, we come here each and every week, and it's been our therapy, and it's great. And I love it. I love coming here and doing it, and then we get to talk to people like Griffin, and it gets even better. So appreciate you for being here. This was a lot of fun. I do want to note before we get out of here real fast, speaking of Lilo and Stitch, we will have a review of that coming later this week as well. I don't know for sure. We haven't recorded it yet, but I'm fairly certain that my son is going to join us for that conversation. I mentioned this on...
I am so scared if I hate this movie.
Well, look, I don't think it's great either. I hope he's not listening. But he's like right next door too. Like, it's fine. I think it's at best it's fine. However, it was incredible because we went to the press screening for it, and he got out his pencil and a notepad. He was taking notes, and I actually have him right here. He's got actual notes. I don't know if you can see.
Oh my God!
He wrote notes like for
That's
the film.
so cool. What
New
the hell?
generation of film critics are being born.
Yeah. So he's like my little film critic in training. He really had a great time, and I asked him if he wanted to come on the show, and he's very excited for it. So
wow.
We'll see. I'm a little nervous he's going to get camera shy, but if we can make it work, we'll
that'll be cute.
So it'll be fun.
Yeah, wouldn't be the first time he's been on the podcast, even though he might not remember that time.
No, he was just a little infant the last time he was on the podcast.
Yeah.
He was just a little baby boy.
We used his crying to lead into a movie that we don't like.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We haven't figured out what the main show is going to be this week. Either it'll be Tom Cruise related, most likely, either stunts or scenes, something to that effect. But you can be on the lookout for that as well. Dave and all the writers have great work going on each and every week there as well. I do want to highlight Hector and his all of his reviews from Cannes are now up at the site as well, and on sessionfilm.com. So if you want a Cannes recap, you can go and check all of that out as well. With that said, thanks, Griffin, for being here once again. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.